going to finish up chapter 15 today. Actually, it's broken up into two parts, but first part of chapter 15 is called Darwin Presents His Case. So this video is actually going to focus on, finally, Darwin's work, how he actually put it out there, what his ideas were. Because up to this point, we've kind of talked about the background information of Darwin, the trip that he made, and the people that influenced him. So now we're going to take a look at his actual ideas. So his first big achievement was obviously the publication of his book, which we all looked at, and this book was titled On the Origin of Species. However, kind of was a weird road to actually get him there before he actually published it. So what he did, to start off again on his trips, he filled notebooks with his ideas about species diversity and the evolution process. So this was occurring after he got back while he was on his trip, just kind of constantly writing things down. And then Darwin is actually stunned and disturbed by his discoveries, because at this time the church was very powerful, and if you went against their teachings, then it was pretty serious offense. So Darwin was kind of, again, he was really kind of shocked at what he came up with, because he did not really think this would ever be possible, because he didn't want to feel like he was going against the church. So since he was so shocked and disturbed by his work, he shelved his manuscript, meaning he just put it on the shelf for years. He didn't touch it, he didn't do anything with it, and he told his wife just to publish it in case he died. So he was completely content not publishing his work, because he didn't want people to either A, think he was stupid because maybe he was wrong, or B, think he was trying to go against the church. So he told his wife, hey, if I die, you can go ahead and publish this. However, in 1858, Darwin got kind of a kick in the pants here when he received a short essay from a guy by the last name of Wallace. His first name Alfred Wallace. So this is an important guy you're going to need to know. And this essay summarized Darwin's thoughts on evolutionary change. So this Wallace guy, he wrote a complete essay that was almost identical to what everything that Darwin thought already, without ever talking to Darwin before. So he just kind of knew Darwin was kind of up there. He was a really famous scientist for other work, so he just wanted to see what Darwin thought about his work. So when Darwin read this, he was almost like, well, shoot, I better hurry up or else someone's going to get credit for my theory. So later that year, Darwin presented his work to a big panel of the scientists. At that time, they're kind of high up in England, and he actually uses Wallace's essay as well. And so he almost kind of used Wallace's essay as proof that his work was correct. And so then in 1859, Darwin finally published his book On the Origin of Species. And this guy up here, again, Alfred Wallace, had played a big role, because if he didn't write that letter, maybe Darwin's work would have never got published. So Alfred Wallace kind of gave Darwin the kick in the pants, and Wallace should receive a lot more credit than what he does, because he had almost all the same ideas that Darwin did. So once you actually cracked open his book, in his book Darwin proposed a mechanism for evolution called natural selection. So this is going to be a huge word you're going to have to know the meaning of. Natural selection, we'll get to that, what it means exactly later on. And he also presented evidence that evolution has been taking place for millions of years and continues in all living things. Again, this millions of years is a big, important topic, because, again, the church thought that the world was only 1,000 years old, a couple thousand years old. And so some of the first major characteristics that were mentioned in his book was something called inherited variation and artificial selection. So what Darwin said in his book was that members of each species would vary from one another in important ways. So just giving a quick example, no two humans are identical. That's just obvious. We can see that pretty clearly. So that's variation in a species. They vary from one another. And in Darwin's day, variations were thought to be unimportant and just minor defects. So no one really thought too much of variation. Someone just thought maybe someone was a lesser being, or if a rabbit was a little bit smaller than another rabbit, then the bigger one was didn't have as many defects as the smaller one. So however, Darwin argued that this variation mattered, so he thought it was more important than just a couple of minor defects. And one way that he noted that was that with plant and animal breeders at the time, they would only breed their largest hogs, their fastest horses, or the cows that produce the most milk. So those are all important variations that people really just kept an eye out for, and it just makes sense. If you're raising hogs and you're selling them to make meat, you're not going to want to raise little ones, so you're going to find your biggest ones and you're going to breed them, because then your hopes is that the babies will be just as big as their parents were. And so Darwin termed this process artificial selection. And a better definition for artificial selection is simply, so this is kind of again going along with natural selection, but we'll get to that later, but artificial selection is the selection by humans for breeding of useful traits from the natural variation among different organisms. So it's humans actually coming in and saying if I have 100 pigs living and on my farm, like I want this pig to mate with this pig, and you put them together, and that is artificial selection because you want to make produce baby pigs that are going to be bigger and give you the most meat. And kind of an example of how this works in plants, it can work in plants as well as animals, is that we have one ancestral plant, so this one plant, and from it gave rise to 5 other separate plants that we eat today. So kale, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi are all variations of the same plant because along the line someone noticed, hey, that plant has really big leaves, I'm just going to reproduce it with the other big leaf plants, and then they came up with kale. Or, oh, this has a really thick base next to the root, I'm going to breed it with other thick base roots, and I'm going to have kohlrabi. And so that's how artificial selection works in animals as well as plants. So now we're going to get to the whole meat and potatoes of his theory when we talk about evolution by natural selection. So Darwin compared processes in nature to artificial selection. So he looked at that and noticed that it does kind of happen in nature as well. And so by doing so, he developed a hypothesis to explain how evolution occurs. And the first point in this hypothesis was something called the struggle for existence. So how this relates is that Darwin realized that high birth rates and a shortage of life's basic needs would force organisms to compete for resources. We've been talking about that for probably 3 or 4 chapters in a row now, just how organisms are always competing for resources. So Darwin knew that, and he knew that was going to be something important. And he termed this the struggle for existence, and it means that members of each species are going to compete regularly to obtain food, living space, and other necessities of life, and this struggle was central to his theory of evolution. So the fact that organisms were always fighting in order to survive is really an important characteristic of Darwin's theory of evolution because it's going to play a big role in a couple of our big vocabulary words that we're going to get to here in a second. And the first one being is natural selection and species fitness. So fitness is going to be a big word that we're going to need to know. So survival of the fittest, again, we're going to get to what that means more, again, going on with the struggle for existence. So the first thing is the word fitness. So this is in terms of evolution. The ability of an individual to survive and reproduce in its specific environment is known as its fitness. So certain animals, depending on how successful they are at reproducing and surviving in their environment, that determines their fitness. And Darwin proposed that fitness is a result of adaptations, and so then another big important word is an adaptation is any inherited characteristic that increases an organism's chance of survival. So adaptations directly correlate with the fitness of an organism. And successful adaptations will enable organisms to become better suited to their environment and better able to survive and reproduce. So that just makes sense. If I'm living in an area where it's snow all the time and I have white fur, I'm going to be able to survive and therefore reproduce and pass my white fur on to my to my children. And so individuals with characteristics that are not well suited for their environment, they either die or leave few offspring. So if I'm living in an area where there's snow and there's a rabbit right next to me that has brown fur, the lynx is going to pick him off and he's going to eat him. He's not going to pass on any of his genes, and he's going to leave few offspring. So individuals that are better suited to their environment survive and reproduce most successfully, and Darwin called this process survival of the fittest. So that is a big term we're going to need to know, survival of the fittest. And because of its similarities to artificial selection, Darwin referred to survival of the fittest as natural selection. So natural selection is just another term for survival of the fittest. And in natural selection, the traits being selected contribute to an organism's fitness and its environment. So they all are correlating directly with one another. And over time, natural selection will result in changes in the inherited characteristics of a population, and these changes will increase a species' fitness and its environment. So that is it for our first half of this video. Let me know if you have any questions.